We did move room. Did you find it okay? Good for you. Are you in the right place? Are you here to learn about coding? No coding? You look like a big bunch of coders. Cool. We'll start in 1 minute. We'll give people a minute to arrive. While you're waiting, we have an hour and a half of public speaking, the world's most sexy topic. Not really. But is there anything you particularly want to learn in the next hour and a half? And I'll make sure to teach it to you. It'll be helpful. David's my name, in case you haven't heard me abusing people so far at the conference in some way or other that was mildly inappropriate. Thanks for not sitting up the front. Well done, you people. That's good. Thanks for you, the only brave man in the place. Oh yeah, the rest of you, suitcases in hand, ready to leave at any moment. You're not just going to leave, you are going to travel internationally and live somewhere else. That's how bad you anticipated this to be. No pressure. Anything you want to learn. You won't need phones, you won't need computers. If you're on your computer, I'm going to assume you're sending dirty content to someone inappropriately. I'm going to give you a link at the end, and on that link is going to be everything. If you don't want to take notes in any way, shape, or form, you don't have to. I'll give you a link with everything I'm going to say. I think I've taught this to like 40-odd thousand people. So most of the time they've asked questions that I've kind of figured out. And I'm like, some days I just forget stuff. Sometimes I succumb to stereotypes. Go out drinking the night before, turn up, don't make any sense. So I better write this down somewhere. So I'll give you a guide and tips and a link. Any content I mention, any books I mention, any video examples I mention, they're all going to be on this link at the end. So take notes if you like taking notes. If you don't, no stress. Anything you want to learn? And we have Andrew Tarvin here, who's much smarter than I am at the public speaking as well stuff. But anything you want to learn about public speaking, any pain points, now's a good time to tell me while I'm killing time for 5 minutes. Yes?
How to start strong.
How to start strong? Well, I've disproved how to do that already. Yeah, start strong is a good one. I think there's 2 sneaky ways of that. But yeah, we'll get to that.
When you have a presentation, you have information you want to put out there. A big challenge for me is how you inject comedy into it.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. Cool. By show of hands, how many of you are speakers or were speaking at this conference or do a lot of speaking? If you don't mind. Cool. How many are like, I want to do some speaking? I'm in the zone. I'm going to pull it off. Good. And how many hate public speaking? You're like, this is horrendous. Never want to do it, but my boss is making me. Okay, good. I hate it too, but I just ended up having to do it. So all this content comes from a place of hating it, but just doing it repeatedly and talking to people much smarter than I'll ever be on it. And I only ever agreed to teach this because I'm just amazed by how many people just don't seem to notice. So they're like, oh, we're coaching public speaking. I'm like, you don't know that. Don't tell them to do that. It's going to go horribly wrong. So there's a couple of sneaky things you can know. Sorry, you had a question.
I was just going to ask you, is there any standard procedure you use before you go on stage?
Yes, I go to the bathroom and my bottom does the weirdest things. And I just have not figured out how to stop that happening yet. No, pre-stage. Sorry, that sounded a bit rude for 10 in the morning. Maybe at lunch you'd be like, no, that's okay. Happens to me too. Okay, good. I'll get to the rest in a sec.
How to combat your nerves.
Okay, we'll definitely do that. I don't combat them. I'd love to tell you there's an easy way to that. When there's consequences, there isn't, but there's a few ways to hide it. So maybe that one's better. Hide, combat. Combat sounds very American aggressiveness. I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to blow up those nerves and take it for America. Like, oh, America! They're like, nope, that's not going to happen. You're going down in a blaze of glory. Yeah.
Convert an unengaged audience when the audience is just like flat.
Yeah, that happens. Audience is flat. There's a couple of hacks for doing that. It happens all the time, speaking at conferences. Cool. I'll get to that one for sure. Anyone else? Do.
Also,
Ending strong. I don't know if I'll do that today, but okay, I'll try. Andrew, you teach that later. I just normally end with a cuddle. And a realization that we'll never see each other again. No, go ahead. Yeah, hello.
The best way to make fun of something that legitimately is funny, but when you got a room full of people and you want to make fun of something, sometimes you just lose that because you're like, oh, that's not appropriate to laugh at. So there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way to get the crowd to laugh with you and not be.
Oh, totally, yeah. And if they don't, you just acknowledge the inherent failure of it. I just talked about having a poo a minute ago. Shouldn't have said that. It came out. And you all thought, shouldn't have said that. And I said, well, I shouldn't have said that. And you went, that's kind of funny. And that was it. So in comedy, a huge part of it is acknowledging the obvious thoughts of the audience. So if you say something that's a little bit mental, as long as it isn't offensive, and as long as the wording is soft in there and there's no potential for it to go sideways, acknowledging the obvious failure of success or something would usually generate the reaction. So comedy is essentially me creating a pattern that allows me and my thoughts to be one step ahead of you to catch up. So if I kind of know what you're about to think or say, or I acknowledge the likely sentiments of the audience, it's usually funny, because you're usually saying, I know how you feel. So if you walk out on stage and you're like, you people look bored out of your mind. What's been going horribly wrong in here today? They'll normally, oh, yeah. Because you're saying what they think. It's really warm in here, isn't it? It's really cold in here, isn't it? That was a bit weird, wasn't it? It's just acknowledging what you're looking at as a group of people. So in comedy, they call it acknowledging the obvious. So if something fails, you say it failed. You don't work through it. So like, say the AV equipment is being horribly wrong and uncooperative, you have to talk about that. Like, they can see it's going horribly wrong. So I was in a talk once, and this guy, he's like, the fire alarm started going off, and he's like, it's fine, I've just got 15 slides left. We can get through this quickly. I'm like, we're on fire. You need to shut up, and we need to get out of here. Yeah, I take, somebody else had one hand up, and then I get stuck in. Yeah, oh, 2 or 3. Yeah, go, shout, nice and quick. Cool, yeah. Voice high and cadence. Ignore my waffle here, I'm dyslexic, so if I'm the only one who can read this, I'll read it back to you later. Fast talking is not a problem. I'm from Ireland, that's what we do professionally. Sadly, but not stopping in the right places is a problem. So anyone who ever coaches you and tells you to slow down, don't. Just speak at whatever rate. Anyway, I'll get through these, but just speak whatever rate is comfortable for you. That's how you speak. When you get to an important point, shut up. That's very important. So you just need them to be able to catch up with you and go, okay. But talking fast is not a problem for anyone. I can talk at 100 miles an hour now, total Irish speed, even with a wacky accent. You'll be like, yeah, kind of understand. Okay. Good enough. That's the most impressive laptop computer I've seen in years. It's like a box of manliness. Good work. Straight from a man cave. Ergonomically, yeah, you got to watch out for that carpool tunnel syndrome, which recently I just discovered was a thing. I thought it was just people were stuck in transport for a long time. I was not a popular manager. And I was like, oh my God, my carpool tunnel. I'm like, just take a train or public transport. I don't know why you're so stuck. All right, I'll take one more. Someone had one. Sorry. Okay, 2 more. So.
I ended up working in a pretty dark, tough topic in the industry that we work.
What is it?
Mental health.
Okay.
And it'd be really great when I'm speaking to be able to respectfully add to the talk so they're not so dark.
Yeah. Yours is ripe for humor. So actually, it's kind of the opposite applies. You're like, oh, I have to be sensitive. But you're like, actually, you have some amazing content there. You just have to way to frame it that it's okay. Yeah, I'll tell you how to do that in a sec. Make sure I come back to it. If you asked a question, I don't answer it over the next hour and a half, make sure you come back and go, oi. Cool, and one last one, and I get started.
Are there any good, like, group icebreakers?
Group icebreakers. Yeah, they kind of freak me out a bit, personally, because I'm Irish. I'm not happy enough for those, but.
We just did a great finger and thumbs up one in the last session.
Finger and thumbs up, and it was good stuff.
Finger point and a thumbs up.
See, that would freak me out. That just sounds like unnecessary human connection. That is Andrew. He's way too happy. He will cuddle you after the session. No problem. That's his style. He's way better at those than me. On the icebreakers, I could try and make it up, but in comedy and best speakers, they tend to do the same thing. They ask a question, who here? And then they make sure they cover the opposite, because you're trying to hit everyone in the room. So here, speak Spanish, and then people put up their hand, but a lot of people did nothing. So the easiest way to rectify that is ask the opposite of the question. Well, who here doesn't speak Spanish? Now everyone have done something. It's not an icebreaker. The easiest and best icebreaker I've ever come across is like you have 1 minute, tell someone next to you a story that doesn't involve anything about your job. And the other person has to remain silent, and then you get them to repeat that exercise. And the proof of it, you're doing it to prove, and you have to make it clear to them that you will connect with someone very quickly if you just shut up and listen. Yeah, and that is all a common form and story. And that's kind of the crux of this class, to be honest, is it's based on storytelling, but it should help you become a much better speaker just by understanding a couple of key things. So I'll get stuck into it because we don't have a ton of time. Afterwards, I'm not going anywhere. So if I didn't hit a question, I'll hit everything they ask, but if you had more and you're just like me, you'd never ever put up your hand and ask a question. In Ireland, it's nearly beaten out of us in school. If you put up a hand, everyone's eyes just go there. Why would you do this? We're all going to be here longer, so I've very much been trained not to do it. So if you're a bit like me, just hang around after, and I'm not going anywhere in a hurry. But essentially, we just want to hack this, so we want to get to a stage where we look pretty confident and good and better than the average speaker, and that's surprisingly easy to do most of the time, even if you hate it. And I'm not super oh, there we go. So I'm doing it under the premise yesterday that I said on stage, the brain doesn't pay attention to boring things, but we also want to hang two particular things and be very sensitive to them, that the end of laughter is followed by the height of listening. So the most attention you'll ever have is the moment after you make people laugh. So if you're dealing with mental health, a laugh, and then something serious should come next, or something funny. But be quite sensitive to what you're going to say next, because you have the full attention of the room. This is what makes your timing look great. So you need to be very sensitive to this statement. When you make people laugh, they want to laugh more, but they also assume that what you're going to say next is going to be amazing. So it better be amazing, or it better be serious, or it better be important, because you've grabbed their full attention. But you need to know that you control that attention. So if you're laughing out loud and I start talking again, you stop laughing, because you assume I'm going to say something you need to pay attention to. So it's what makes your timing look great, and you can shortcut that timing just through writing. Any of you any good at writing, by way of hands? Anyone consider it? I'm not going to bother asking the opposite side of that. But if you can be a good writer, you can be an extremely good speaker. You just need to write and plan and pay attention to the structure of what you're going to say. And I want to show you that with a couple of little examples. And has anyone, by show of hands, taken public speaking classes before? In any way, shape, or form? A lot of you? No? So good for you. If you do, if you haven't, lucky you. You've avoided that in life for a long time like me. If you have, they're going to focus a lot of time on what you do with your hands. Ooh, move your hands like this. Make eye contact with people. Really freak them out. Hold that eye contact. Look at him. He was just wishing he's not wearing shorts immediately. He's like, why is he locking eyes with me? I shouldn't have worn these shorts today or sat up the front. That becomes irrelevant if you're speaking rubbish. So rubbish content delivered beautifully is still rubbish. So I'm going to teach you loads on the delivery side today. Don't worry, but it's going to come in the latter half of this, and I'll give you a load of tips. You probably haven't heard any of them before. They'll be very helpful. But at the start, what are you actually going to say? So we're all in a content marketing conference. Get focused on the content first of what you're going to say. We want to structure it in a certain way. So you can get away with delivering amazing content badly, but you look like a weirdo if you beautifully deliver crap content. Because you're just up there moving your hands around and articulating, this is the most important point. And you're like, this person's a weirdo. What a freak. Why am I even here? But it just seems very fake if they're doing that. So just what are you actually going to say first? So we're going to break down. I had way too much time on my hands a while back. And we started breaking down all the world's funniest talks and speakers, and we correlated them all. So Seth Godin, his face has gone missing there due to technical malfunctions. But that's how, you know Seth Godin? I assume you would, Marketing Content Conference. One of the best speakers in the world in content marketing. He's so funny that TED actually described his talks as hilarious. And he's actually so funny he makes people laugh 3.4 times a minute, which means nothing until you compare it to the 3 funniest movies of all time. So if you listen to this guy talking about marketing, he's funnier than every one of the world's funniest movies on a sheer repetition laughter. So not how loud you laugh, but how often you're going to laugh. You'll be better off watching Seth Godin than The Hangover, which is insane if you just wanted to laugh a lot. And the thing is, he's not alone. So when we correlate every one of the world's leading talks, they were all funny. And a lot of them were actually around 3 laughs per minute. So they are getting a lot of engagement through laughter. But the question is, how are they actually doing it? So when Seth Godin does it, he gets 58% of them from images. So there's a big thing you can do in your talks, and a big thing a lot of people do. Like Andrew in his talk yesterday had an epic image of a little dog. Did you remember that one? There was huskies, or what do you call them? Huskies? And then a little sausage dog in the middle, looking very, they're not huskies. What are they? You don't even know what kind of dog it was. You're going around showing those dogs to people on mass quantities. You should be emotionally connected to those dogs. What kind of dog was it? Dachshund. Oh, the little one. But what were the big ones? Huskies. I thought I was mental there for a moment. I was like, America's pulling a switcheroo on me on the old wording again. Yeah, so it was just funny by itself, but how you set that up is very important. If you have funny images in your presentation, it doesn't take a whole lot to go on Reddit and find stuff or Imgur that's already socially proven and funny. Even though 10 million people have seen those photos, the average person has not seen that photo. The average person has not read a best-selling book. Bless you. You okay? That was aggressive. Okay. But the average person, they have not read, like, you can get a best-selling book. I have one, sadly, I know, by selling like 7,000 or 8,000 copies of a book on the right week of the year. So best-selling author means most people have never still heard of it. So you can quote a lot of that content. You can do the same with images. They've never seen it before. It's new to your audience. But set it up in a certain way like a comedian would. Very important. You can't just put the image up there and go, look at that. Funny. So, and they're just like, you're a freak. Like, why? What are you doing? So you build a little anticipation. In an ideal world, a misdirection. So I had one with, were you at the talk yesterday evening, any of you, when I had one of KFC? And I was like, what's KFC? You're like, KFC resolved everything just by doing this one image. And your brain goes, what's the image? And then you show it, and there's a laugh. So you're expecting something, it builds up, it's a little bit of a flip, but it builds up to that. It creates the anticipation and then the reveal, and then you can comment on it. So like Andrew did yesterday, when he puts up the dogs, he's like, and look at the little one in the middle. His legs don't even hit the ground. And we're all thinking, yeah, his legs don't hit the ground. I was just thinking that. But you have a huge advantage when you put up a photo because you know what's coming. So like what's obvious or weird about the photo, you can get a lot of laughs by describing the photo after you show it, but build it up a little bit. And I just want to show you a quick example. This is Amy Cuddy. She's the world's leading expert on body language. You might have seen her talk before. It's the second most viewed talk in the whole world. But when you're up there as a speaker, or you're nervous, or you hate it, or you love it, there's no real feedback between you and the audience a lot of the time, except laughter. So how do you know it's going really well, really quickly? Usually, the only thing that puts you at comfort as a speaker is laughter. So just watch the difference. Bear in mind, this lady is the world's leading expert on body language. Watch her body language change before and after she makes people laugh, and ask yourself, does this content need to be in here? So you never really need to throw something funny in there, the images in the video, but you can use it even at the highest level. So just pay attention to her. Hopefully it works, because we didn't get to test any of this stuff beforehand. Come on. You can do it.
So we're really fascinated with body language.
Oh, thanks.
And we're particularly interested in other people's body language. You know, we're interested in, like, you know, an awkward interaction, or a smile, or a contemptuous glance, or maybe a very awkward wink, or maybe even something like a handshake.
Here they are arriving at number 10, and look at this lucky policeman gets to shake hands with the President of the United States. Oh, and here comes the Prime Minister of the... No.
So a handshake, or the lack of a handshake, can have us talking for weeks and weeks and weeks, even the BBC and the New York Times.
Whoa, why is that a picture of me? That was scary. So what I like about that, you like her? Have you seen it before? Very likable, very nice, but if you watch, that content does not need to be in there. It's already gone viral. It's already funny. You will laugh nearly every single time you watch that video. But before that video, she's doing something nervous speakers do and worry about a lot. Filler words. Irish people, we're emotionally attached to them. Like, but in Ireland, it's even worse. We tend to use dirty words instead of filler words. Doesn't go down too well in America. But you'll notice she's like, but plays the video, gets the laugh, and then her whole body opens up and she's like, I showed you that. But as a very different person who's the world's leading expert on body language, you should kind of know that. So quick point for you to take away from this. The easiest way to improve all your talks and all your public speaking is spend some time to put some funny images in there, or play a video from somebody else and just build it up. Why should they be excited about the video? Show them the video. What's this image going to be? Show them. So a friend of mine, she hates public speaking. She got invited. She was the head of recruitment at Airbnb, head of all human resources, pretty big job. Got invited to speak at LinkedIn's conference in Australia. And we just spent 10 minutes shoving images into her presentation. So she had an example of how it felt to her to go through hypergrowth with Airbnb, because you can imagine how busy she was trying to recruit people to keep up with that job. And she's like, here's a picture of me at my desk looking pretty calm. That's what I like about this picture. You'll see it's very organized. She describes everything in the picture. She's like, but on the inside, I really felt like this. And everyone went, what did you feel like? And then she showed a photo, and it was a little girl being blasted in the face by an out-of-control fire hydrant. And everybody laughed really loudly, but it conveyed so much without her going on an emotional rant and waffle, right? Because she said, I just was in a really tough place at that time. It was total overload, and emotionally, I just wasn't really feeling it. It was a terrible time in my life, to be honest. And you'd be like, this person's having a breakdown in front of me, and all of that is replaced by a funny image that's much more powerful and, importantly, much less words. So in the world of public speaking, you don't have that much time these days. I don't like to quote English people, but brevity is levity, according to Shakespeare, and he was definitely right there. Just years of adversity behind the scenes. It's all right. You know what English people did, right? Any English? No, okay. Just one, no, get out. 80-20 principle. So we're just going to shortcut this today. So number one, the easiest thing you can do is put in other people's content and make it relevant to yours, and don't describe how you felt, show somebody how you felt. Much easier and much more. They can tweet it, they can take photos of it, they can share your content, and it saves you vocalizing stuff that can be quite difficult to vocalize sometimes. So 80-20 principle, that's all we're doing today. We want to figure out what are the 20% of the things that will give you 80% of the results. Images and video are one of them. Right? The next biggest thing in it is starting with a story. If there's no story in your talk whatsoever, you're going to find life a little bit difficult because you're competing against brain, attention, and science. You need a story to be memorable. If I want to teach you something and there's no story in it, you're going to find it very hard to repeat it. Now, I don't mean a complex story. Like, have you been to storytelling workshops in this thing? Like, I've been doing storytelling shows for 6 years. I run storytelling shows monthly. I hosted the MOT, the NPR thing. I won every MOT competition I ever did. I came second in most of the finals and ate it in when you came to see if I go in first. But I know a lot about storytelling. It ain't complicated. Like, I don't need to go to a course in storytelling. Just tell me the fucking story. Like, what happened? That's it. Cut out all the unnecessary words. Figure out what you're going to say. What's the important part of it? Put that last, and then work your way backwards. That story, it doesn't have to be anything world-changing. So that was a story I told you yesterday about KFC screwed something up. KFC ran out of chicken. They're meant to sell chicken. They didn't have any. And your mind says, what did they do there? Well, this is what they did. And then everyone was happy. Okay, that's a story. Like, no hero's journey, no three-act structure, none of that waffle. It's memorable. You can retell it, and you left there and you went, oh yeah, I remember that. Right? So don't overcomplicate something that is human nature and innately possible, and don't put pressure on yourself to go, I've got nothing. Like, if I'm like, tell me a story, you're like, oh my God, leave me alone. We have millions of them. We want to start to log them, and we want to shove them into our presentations, even if they don't make sense on the face of it. Who does speak Spanish, by the way, by show of hands? Just one. Good diversity, well done. Two, she's German. Okay, Jesus, go America. The only people who speak Spanish here are Germans. Good work. 55 million in America speak Spanish. Did you know that? Yeah. You just said no, not for me. Good for you. Unnecessary learning. Where are you from? Are you from somewhere, or you just studied it? Colombia. Oh, Jesus. Very interesting place. Colombia, when they take the bus, they believe that if you sit on a warm seat, that you will get diseases in your bottom. Very unusual, really freaked me out as an Irish person because I love a good warm seat. You know, when you get on a bus and the seat is already warm and you're like, oh God, I'm glad it's warm. This is so cozy. In Colombia, they're like, I'm going to get diseases in my bum. I cannot sit on the seat until it becomes cold. So you can see by the way she's reacting, this is 100% true. They hover over the seat like a sumo wrestler, little old ladies, for like 5 minutes on a bumpy bus until they finally put their bottom on the seat when it gets cold. But yeah, welcome Colombia, thanks. Just some facts about Colombia. That was a story, didn't really have a beginning, middle, or end, but does that happen in Colombia? Yeah, good. Makes normal country. I would never have made Narcos. I just would have made a series about old women on buses. Anyway, so if I was trying to teach you something about Spanish that I want you to remember, the word in Spanish for to fit is caber. Right, there's a word. If I want to fit something somewhere, the word is caber. Is that correct? Don't trust Irish people teaching you Spanish. But if I throw that word at you, you cannot repeat that to me tomorrow. It's nearly impossible without using any form of brain science. But if I tell you, let's make a little story out of a word caber in a way that your mind can process it using storytelling techniques that you already kind of know them already. So let's strip caber into two words that sound familiar to your English-speaking mind: cab, taxi cab, and a bear. Taxi cab, very important. Picture a New York City old style, like 1980s, 1990s, the kind of round, bubbly New York street taxi cab. Picture it pulling up to Trump Plaza and not running over Trump. That would be cool, though. But I can't say that for political reasons. So pulls up, Trump's nowhere near his building, but it is his building, and a bear runs out. Bless you. Good man, Byron. You can sneeze as loud as you like. It's your conference. A hairy bear runs out and gets into the taxi cab, and it doesn't fit, right? So taxi drivers go mental. He's like, bear, get out. You can't be getting in the taxi cab. And the bear tries to get in. His hairy bottom is sticking out the window, and his legs are swinging in the wind because he does not fit in this taxi cab. Cab air is the word for to fit. The bear does not fit in the cab, right? So we've made a story that makes no sense whatsoever apart from to anyone in this room, but I ask you for the rest of your life, if I ask you what's the word in Spanish for to fit, you'll be able to tell me caber. Because we made a story and we visualize it and now we remember it. So anyone who studies languages rapidly using the 80-20 principle, that's the technique they use. If I want to memorize my talk, that's the technique I use. If I want to avoid going blank on stage, that's the technique I use. But if I want to tell you something that I know that you can repeat to me tomorrow, that's the technique I use. Do you remember anything about my mother yesterday? Doing weed cookies and stuff. It's just memorable because you start picturing your mother and you're like, oh, Jesus, yeah, his mother is a bit of a lunatic. Why is that tied to content? Oh, yeah, okay, I remember. But just watch, you'll think I'm nuts until you see this in action. So if I told you you could replicate on a 1 hour, 30-minute session, we come in here, that you can replicate the world's best ever TED Talk, you'll be like, no, I can't. But when you break down the components of it, you'll be like, actually, I have stuff that is quite comparable to this. I just need to structure it in a certain way. So this is Ken Robinson. This is the most viewed TED Talk of all time, the most popular TED Talk of all time. When I'm writing CEOs' talks, always they say, I want to be like Ken Robinson. Every single time. And I'm like, well, you can be, but his style is unique to him. His stories are unique to him. You can replicate what he's doing, but like you're not going to be him because he's very unique. So just watch. It's all personal storytelling. So just watch. This is one short clip and ask yourself, has he ever told his story before? Remember, the end of laughter is followed by the height of listening. Important to make your timing look great. Does he know where people are going to laugh? Does he facilitate that laughter? And has this story anything to do with his topic? His topic is, do schools kill creativity? That's the question. So just ask yourself those couple of bits when you're watching it. Hopefully it'll work nicely. Come on, Ken.
We moved from Stratford to Los Angeles, and I just want to say a word about the transition. Actually, my son didn't want to come. I've got 2 kids. He's 21 now, and my daughter's 16. He didn't want to come to Los Angeles. He loved it, but he had a girlfriend in England. This was the love of his life, Sarah. He'd known her for a month. Mind you, they'd had their 4th anniversary. Because it's a long time when you're 16. Anyway, he was really upset on the plane. He said, I'll never find another girl like Sarah. And we were rather pleased about that, frankly, because she was the main reason we were leaving the country.
So they are absolutely loving him and howling laughing. Did you like him? Yeah. Have you seen him before? No, you haven't? Do you think he's ever told that story before?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I think he's told it at every drunken Christmas party he's ever been to. Like, if you ask Ken to meet you for coffee, there's a high chance he'll probably tell you that story by the look of it. But we all have at least 2 or 3 stories in our life that our friends will be like, you have to tell that story. So when you meet up with your friends you haven't seen in a long time, or your family, either at a get-together or you meet up with all work colleagues and they say, you have to tell that story. Go on. There's always one that we have that we love. Stick that into every presentation you ever give. As long as you're not drunk and naked somewhere, and it's anyway mildly inappropriate because you're already good at talking about that, it takes a lot of pressure off. What most speakers don't do is they don't take time to connect the stories we're already good at telling to their topic. So that's really easy to do. Tell any story ever, and after it, say the words, I told you that story because. That's it. So how do you connect it to the topic? So an audience are never going to say, shut up and stop telling us that story. We like stories. So once you start, they're kind of like, oh, tell us more. Have you ever been in a conference where someone went, oh, shut up with that story, will you? We like it, but you don't want to introduce it as a story. So a mistake a lot of speakers make is they're like, I'm now going to share a story. And you're like, oh, God. Right? It's like when they say, I got a great joke for you. And you're like, oh, it's not going to be funny. I'm out of here. So they've given you a moment where you decide if it's good or bad based on your previous existence with that person. But if I just start into a story, no introduction, no build-up. It's a bit like going on a date and you're like, I'm hopefully going to sleep with you later on. Like if this coffee goes good, hopefully we get to procreate. You're like, oh, you total freak show. I knew I should have swiped left. That would never work, but conference speakers do it all the time. Here's a story. You're like, this is going to suck. Your boss calls you into an office, God, great joke for you, man. Have a seat. You're like, oh, get me out of here. So you don't want to telegraph your intention. You just want to walk them into what you're doing. But has that story anything to do with schools killing creativity? Nothing. Not even loosely related. Nobody cares. It's actually the best talk in history by popularity, by viewers, and by repetition, not connected to the topic. So don't put a lot of pressure on yourself to find stories exactly relevant to content marketing. Think a little bit wider than that. The timing is very important there. Did you notice that when they laugh, he shuts up and lets them laugh? So even though they're laughing more than he expected, he's like, oh, they're laughing pretty loud here. I have to shut up, because you facilitate that laughter. The end of laughter is followed by the height of listening. If he talks again there at any moment, he shuts them off completely. So if you ever watched President Obama back in the days, you always would have thought his timing is fantastic. And it was, but he was the first president in US history to read all his speeches from a teleprompter. And they were written primarily by 3 comedians. And they know sentence structure, so like, that's the funny bit. We're gonna do a certain thing with it, and I'll teach you in a sec that allows your timing to look really good. But just remember, if you have those signature stories in life, tell those stories. You do have them. Start a list on your phone and just call it funny story file or funny stuff. Make sure it's on your phone and not in a diary or notebook. And every time you see and hear or remember something crazy, write it there, because you're going to come back to that for content in the future. If I tell you now, tell me a story, something's not going to come to you immediately. So just every time you're reminded of something funny that you totally forgot about, write it down, and we're going to come back to that in the future. But Ken is the style we're really trying to replicate. But within his talk, we can use certain very clear comedy techniques. So he's using a certain structure that comedians live by. So storytelling is wonderful in the world of business, but it has to be concise storytelling. It doesn't really have to follow that hero's journey 3-act structure, but it does have to be concise. Using joke structure forces it to make it concise. So comedians live off this. It's the minimum amount of information you need to understand what the punchline is. So the minimum amount of information in the story to get the point. So I don't need to know if the story's about your mother eating weed cookies, like, do I need to know what your mother eats on a Tuesday, or where she used to work, or why she married your father? It's like, what can I pull out of that story and just get to the point super fast? And we've heard over and over again at this conference, and it's very true, the audience don't care about your story, they care about themselves within your story. So you can't just start the story, one Tuesday I was walking down the road. You want to open it up a little bit to say why it might be relevant to them. And that's the same even with a joke. So let me show you by way of example is the easiest thing. So Ken Robinson's, do you know what the punchline was? So comedy is always setup, background information, punchline. There's a key funny part to that, and it's always at the end. So do you remember Ken Robinson's talk? Was there any clear, like, that's the funniest part in here? Any little twist? She was the reason we were leaving the country. And that doesn't really make sense until leaving the country. It all kind of comes together on country. He knows that's the funniest, sneaky part. You move that to the end, that's the highest laugh, and he just has to shut up after that and let them laugh it out. And the thing is, he's just telling them a story. We don't want to tell jokes because jokes have a risk of failure, especially in business, but even in comedy. That's why you hear comedians talking about bombing quite a lot. Here's a thing that's obviously me trying to be funny. Here's you going, I don't think that's funny. But if I tell you a story and the funny bit is hidden at the end, it's the last thing that's going to come. Your chances of laughter are very high because I'm not trying to be funny. I'm just telling you something that happened to me, and it's up to you to react or not, but I've created a space for you to react. So that doesn't bomb. That just ends up with me making a point and you going, oh, okay, your mother ate weed cookies. Who cares? What's next? But there was no moment where you're like, oh, you're trying to be funny there. It's different doing stand-up comedy when you see us doing it on stage. I don't know if any of you were at Laugh Boston. That's a little bit different. But in the world of public speaking, the impact words are delayed. So it's key with you if you're pitching a number or you have a project or you're trying to get more money from your boss or you're in presenting something. And as a key number, we need 10 more people on our team. We need to 3x the budget because we did this last year. If you're trying to emphasize a number, move it to the end. If there's a key bit of information, move it to the end. Super important. So you were saying you talked really fast earlier was one of the points. If you talk really fast and you're like, year on year, we had growth rates of like 80%. We hired another 4 people on our team. We greatly expanded. We've raised a Series A, and now we have 400 million. I'm like, what part of that was the important part? You can still talk really fast, but move it to the end. Just like, we've been doing really well at the moment. Year on year, we've had a growth rate of 80%. Pause. So the 80% gets consciously pulled out, moved to the end. That's the trigger word. That's the thing that I'm trying to emphasize, I need to shut up after it and create a natural pause. So if you write out what you're going to say in advance, ask yourself what's the key point, and move it to the end, that creates the pause in what you're saying. You can talk super fast, but you just need to stop for that moment. And you ideally are not walking at that moment. So if you're walking around like this, and I'm like, we had a growth rate of 80% year on year, and it was amazing, and we hired more people, and I was like, what, calm down. You can do it, you can run around, but as long as you're doing it, you're like, we've been having some explosive growth at the moment, and year on year, we've had a growth rate of 80%. So force yourself to be standing there front and center, talking to the audience to deliver the key points in your talk. Don't walk around for those. Makes a big difference, and then we combine it with something Irish people can't pronounce, but try. The rule of 3. So super important. Content marketers, you probably already know this. Most marketers know this. Copywriters live off this. 3 is the smallest number of elements that your mind can recognize as a pattern. So there you go. No worries. We can answer that if you like. Just collaboratively. No stress. Good time to turn off the phones if you haven't already turned them off. But 3 is the smallest element, sequence of elements your mind can recognize as a pattern. So if I say 1, 2, you expect 3. There's a good example from a friend of ours, Rajiv, mutual friend, who told me this. The best explanation of it is apples, apples, oranges in the world of comedy. So I'm going to give you 2 elements, and your mind's going to assume that you know what the next one is. So if I say 1, 2, and I say 4, you've been expecting 3, and only retrospectively can you see that I've been multiplying the numbers, and it's still a logical sequence. 1, 2, 4 makes total sense, but only retrospectively. Comedy makes sense, but only retrospectively. So I give you 1 and 2, and you assume you know what the next element is, but I've thought about this for a while, so I've twisted the last element. That has the highest chances of laughter in the shortest period of time. So you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but if you're going to have a different element in there, just make it the last one, because the end of laughter is followed by the height of listening. You have the misdirection, you break the sequence, and usually when you do that, people tend to react and laugh. Keyword at the end, sequence break at the end. Because imagine I do something, and then I do something funny, and then I do something serious. There's no sequence to break there, so you don't get a chance to react to it. So humor fails quite a lot in the world of especially corporate life, because they're not using and living from that sequence. So it's hard to describe, but it's very easy to see it in action. So let's show you a president of the United States. Not that one. But just keep an eye out for it. Minimum amount of information, sequence break, funny element at the end.
We live and do business in the information age. But the last major reorganization of the government happened in the age of black and white TV. There are 12 different agencies that deal with exports. There are at least 5 different agencies that deal with housing policy. Then there's my favorite example. The Interior Department is in charge of salmon while they're in freshwater, but the Commerce Department handles them when they're in saltwater. I hear it gets even more complicated once they're smoked.
So not exactly viral hilarity there, but compared to what was going on in Congress that day, that was pretty epic stuff. So what you have there is a minimum amount of information to understand the problem, and then he's going to break a sequence very clearly. Freshwater, saltwater, smoked. Does not work if he changed smoked to any other order anymore. But because he knows where they're likely to laugh, he gets to cross his arms and kind of stand back and go, who's laughing? And that was it. And he looks epic for doing it. The timing looks fantastic, but the structure has facilitated that moment to happen. And it's a very small adjustment, but you'll notice it. There's a little sign from San Francisco. Free beer, topless bartenders, and false advertising. That's not exactly wild hilarity either, but it gets a reaction. It grabs your attention. But like, what happens? So we have a very clear 1, 2, 4, apples, apples, oranges. But what happens if I move false advertising to position number 2? So what happens if I have free beer, false advertising, and topless bartenders? Now it just sounds a bit kinky. It's just weird. Not even Irish people are drinking in that bar anymore. And all I'm doing is changing the structure. So imagine we're looking out for these things. All I'd like you to be able to do after you leave this session today is recognize the techniques at work, and then you can replicate them. If you know what they are, you can start to replicate them and apply them immediately. And I mean, the transition from applying this stuff to becoming a better speaker is the next time you speak, usually, because it's just certain things you're going to do. So remember, we already learned using images is key. We know about the rule of 3, so just watch that in effect. We know that we're going to flip the third element, and we know using images is a powerful visual. To bring humor, another important thing is to exaggerate the last element. So 1, 2, 4, and 4 is exaggerated a little bit to a point that you're like, oh, they're definitely trying to be funny here. I'm going to react to it. This is humorous. So if I said I went to, what's that place? The Cheesecake Factory. Have you ever been there? And I read the menu, and it was like 4,076 pages long. I was in there all day. You know very clearly I'm taking the piss. Can't say that. Making fun a little bit of the number of pages in their menu. But if I said there was like 9 pages on the menu, you'd be like, yes, 9 or 10. Maybe, right? But I'm trying to make a point that's really long, so I have to expand. I have to make fun and exaggerate the last element. So just watch them when we put these things together.
Meanwhile, Michelle has not aged a day. The only way you can date her in photos is by looking at me. Take a look. Here we are in 2008. Here we are a few years later. And this one is from 2 weeks ago.
So again, he's totally murdering it with that stuff, but once you recognize it, you can see, okay. If the skeleton was anywhere else, it's just weird and they don't laugh anymore. So now that you know the comedic principles, you can apply them pretty quickly to your own talks. It can be normal image, goofy image. 1, 2, 4. So just watch out for that in everything you're putting together. If I had to kind of summarize this in a little structure or to put some context to it, I just tried to be like Andrew, because he would have had some sort of graphic that made it all come together. I tried and failed. But generally, it's a funnel when you're public speaking. I know we hate funnels around here, but we do live off them. But you are trying to capture everybody at the start. When you walk into a room, your opening comments are very, very important. How you set up your story is very, very important, because you want to capture everybody. So if I walk in and I say, marketing is dead, funnels are dead, all that sucks, there's a lot of people using funnels in the room, and they're like, I don't agree with that, actually. I see some good conversions through my funnels. I spend a long time setting it up. Screw you. Right? So they're not on board. But if you say something tough and you're like, marketing techniques are changing, and we need to be flexible in how we keep up with that. We need to approach it. It's a soft, generic statement, but it doesn't offend anybody in the room. Nobody crosses their arms. So if I say New Hampshire is a backward kind of place full of hicks, you'd be like, I live there. I don't agree with that, you cheeky bugger. I lived in New Hampshire when I first came to America. Biggest case of false advertising ever, because it said live free or die, and then I opened a beer in public. Open container violation. Didn't know that. That was the quickest ticket I ever got from a police officer. So I'm just enjoying a beer. I was living free or die. And they're like, no, that's just the registration plates. But if I said New Hampshire is a crap place, I don't like it, I've just offended at least 50% of people are like, I don't agree with that. But if I said, in New Hampshire, that can be an interesting place sometimes. And you'd be like, oh yeah, it is. That could be good, it could be bad. I'm not saying anything. That statement hasn't offended anybody. Everybody is still listening. So when you're doing public speaking, you're not a lawyer. You can't be in there just banging a table going, this is how it is and this is my argument. You're trying to convince people to see your point of view on the world. So if I'm telling them a story about me being in China, you don't care. This one time I went to China. You're like, I don't care. That's your first reaction, unless you've been to China or you have an interest in China. But if I start off with a generic funnel statement, being in a new place can be challenging. And you're like, oh yeah, I was in a new place once. If I said being overseas can be challenging, you might say, well, I've never been overseas. I don't know. Right? But if I want to capture the most amount of people, that opening statement is quite important. Don't offend anybody. But it works with jokes as well. Was anyone at Laugh Boston the other night, when we did a few jokes? So I think one of the things I said was, and this happened 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine called me, and she said, your friend's drunk and you need to come pick her up. And I said, well, I'll get her an Uber. She's like, you can't send her home on her own. So I got her an Uber pool. That's a story. It actually happened like that. Uber pool is consciously moved to the end, but the setup statement was, technology is crazy, isn't it, these days? Like, just one little swipe and you can make some terrible decisions. And we all went, I agree with that. And now I can tell a story that's relevant to you because you've swiped at some stage on something that was a bad decision, even if it is just a pair of shoes that chase you around. Bless you. chase you around the internet for the next 6 days, like we were talking about yesterday. So just pay attention to that. What's the word in Spanish for to fit? Caber. Those details are very important. So that was a yellow taxi cab, it was Trump Plaza, and it was a hairy bear. And it gave you a visualization to remember the story. No visualization, you can't remember it. So the details as we go down that funnel become quite important. So the general topic, if that's technology, then you're like, do I have any stories that I can loosely link to technology? Have my parents ever sent me anything weird? Have they ever done anything weird on the internet? Have I made a mistake with technology? Have I sent someone something I shouldn't have, mildly inappropriate? Have I emailed the wrong person once? Have my parents like tried to call me on Skype and it's so frustrating, they're driving me nuts? Or anything with grandparents' technology, that is now all relevant. So general topic, make it relevant, find a story to you, find the key reason for telling the story, and then add details to that story and play around with the details to keep yourself sane. You don't want to be telling the same story all the time. You're not going to tell it with the same enthusiasm, but sometimes you remember little details, and those details are very important to the audience. So that's what keeps it quite fresh. So in a nutshell, that's the content side of it. I'm going to do loads on the delivery tips in a second, and that's what most people are like, oh, that's great, never heard that. And don't worry, you'll learn loads of stuff, but this makes the biggest difference. If you don't actually do this, your talk is still going to be kind of crap most of the time. Like, you have to get into the content, why you're doing it, how you're going to tell it, and what makes it a little bit interesting, and what details should you put in there. Can you add elements of tree to it? A lot of the time you're just giving them one thing, but it could be the broken element of a tree element structure. So wherever you have one thing, see can you make it three things? It's more memorable. Right, like TED themselves, BBC, NPR, all these things are abbreviations, CMC, that you're sitting at right now are always three elements to them because it's easier for you to repeat. So if you're marketing stuff, if you're telling people, if your talk has 7 key takeaways, would it be better if it had 3 key takeaways? We know that's the shortest sequence a mind can remember. So you have 7 action steps, your audience can probably only remember 3. So just cater to that structure. That's it. And I just like, oh, none of the images are coming up. There's a beautiful cat on this image, and it's just not there. It was a cat just leaning on a curb, just kind of kicking it. My description won't bring much justice to it. But delivery we're going to, and those words are gone between the connection from here to the AV, but it shows up on my screen. But yeah, oh, Jesus. That's pretty funny. I can reboot it, or I can just tell. I know, oh, look at you must work in IT. I can do it. I don't really care. We can do it without it. AV equipment, as you know, always kind of goes sideways sometimes. Let me refresh it and see if it works. For a second. But yeah, so this is all on the delivery side. That's the content side. We'll get through this as that loads. It should only take a second. Sweet. Oh my God, I didn't do any of them. No, don't worry. We're coming. It's kind of all in this section there, most of the takeaways. So, okay, I'm going to assume it's working, which might be a flawed assumption. That's what happens when look at them. We had bald influencers yesterday. I went out of my way to put a bald influencer into this talk, and then it disappeared. So very emotional for me. Where is my cat? Where is my cat? Oh, there you go. What a cat. I'm emotionally attached to that cat. Just like cats. Did a presentation once where I just put nothing but cats in a presentation for 5 minutes. It was a bit unusual. All right, so there's a couple of things you can do that make you look quite relaxed and quite natural, but realistically, they're techniques that you need to be aware of. And this is answering a lot of your questions. Let me just move that cursor. First one is the first 30 seconds. Nervous public speakers, people who ask me about a strong start. 2 techniques here to go with, really. Number 1 is memorize the life out of your first 30 seconds. If you're going to practice anything, you're lazy like me and you don't do any practicing most of the time, or you're like, I don't have time to give this a full run-through. So in the world of public speaking, you really have 2 options. TED will make you, if you're doing a TED Talk. Has anyone done one in here? There's probably someone or 2. You have to practice 100 times. If you're on the main stage, they will make you practice this 100 times because that's their analogy for the amount of times it takes for the words to sound not rehearsed. For you to really live and feel the words, they want you to get to a point where you can be listening to music on a radio and sing along your words of your talk to the beat of that song, change the song, and without missing any rhythm, continue to say the same words. That's their test for how much you've ingrained these words. So you have that choice, which I would never do because I don't like doing that, and I usually don't have time to do that. or you can memorize, you know what you're going to say last, and you know what you're going to say first, and if you're nervous, practice those first 30 seconds the most. Because when you walk out in front of people and you're like, holy Moses, there's a lot of people in this room. Oh no, what was I going to say? Oh, this is a bit weird. Anything can go horribly wrong in that moment, because if you're nervous, your heart rate is always going to be up. Your hands are going to be a little bit sweaty. The first words that come out of your mouth, your mind will say, oh my God, I'm squeakier than usual. Why am I squeaky? Can they tell that I'm squeaky? I don't know what's going on. You have this weird internal dialogue with yourself that can send you into a bit of a panic. Lock down the first 30 seconds and just practice that a lot. And if you're a very nervous speaker, do not divert from that no matter what. You just walk out, and this is what I'm going to say for the first 30 seconds to get myself comfortable. Ideally, you'd be into a story by the end of that 30 seconds so that you're comfortable telling anyway. The opposite approach is to do what I do quite a bit, is to walk out and just, hey, like we're just having a conversation. Here's a few things. How's it been going? How's that? That's all right. No worries. And then just start your talk. So Drew is you're more of a walk out and just get into the content, aren't you? Hard start. So you can do it. You walk out, you just pause, and then you start to talk. If nobody's paying attention and you walked into a cold room, which is one of the things, how do you do if the audience is flat? You make them unflat. Ladies and gentlemen, are we still alive? And they'll be like, yeah. You're like, oh my God, that was horrendous. No signs of life. I'm going to have to call the fire brigade or some form of emergency side. Make some louder noise. Who's alive? And then they're alive. Ladies and gentlemen, can we get a round of applause from your organizers, your last speakers, everybody who's been involved? It's been a lot of effort to make this happen. Please, a round of applause for them. At that moment, you can set up your stuff, you can put your drink down, but there's something you cannot do when you applaud is using your phone. Right? And when someone's clapping, everybody else feels the obligation to join in and clap no matter what it was. So even if they've been paying no attention, they hear the applause and they're like, something good happened there. What happened there? I'll just join in. Oh, let me see. So you now have a chance to reset the room even though it's been going horribly wrong. So you walk out, and if they're not paying attention, make them laugh. If they're not paying any attention, just shut up. So the most powerful thing you can do is let silence hang in that moment. You can never bring a room back under control with your voice. So the louder you go a lot of the time, the less they react. But if you walk out and stand and just put your hands there in any way, or just stand there, put one hand in the air is the best technique usually, and just stand there, they just get more silent. And then you just start like nothing happened. So you'll notice a TED speaker will walk out, take a deep breath, and then start to talk. So that's your other option. If you just want to reset yourself mentally, all right, I've got the 30 seconds. Round of applause there. Deep breath, off you go. No harm in doing that. But if the room isn't paying attention, just shut them up and make them pay attention. Yeah?
Why does the one hand work?
I don't know. I think it's something that comes from school teachers used to do it. I think they get trained that in the world of teaching. My dad always did it. But anyone who teaches it and knows their stuff will normally say just standing there with one hand works. Because like, I need your attention, but I'm not doing it in a disrespectful way. And you're just standing there going like, when do you plan on getting quiet? And you can do that. I've never done it for more than like 15 seconds, I don't think. Have you ever had this? What do you use?
I use, like, if I get people to do an activity and then I didn't come back, I'll do it. If you can hear me clap once.
Yeah.
Like a small people
Yeah.
will, and then if you hear me clap twice,
Yeah.
more people will. And you only ever have to go to if you hear me clap 3 times.
Yeah, I can't remember if I got that one from you or not. Andrew I met relatively early when I started doing this, and as you might have noticed, he's one of the better speakers you'll ever see. And when I ask anyone to describe him, they're like, oh, slick, polished, smooth, nice, funny. Like, I'm like, all good words to replicate, and that works every time. So, ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me? If you can hear me, clap your hands, and then it just spreads. So you want to get them to put the phones down and clap. Yeah.
A couple of tips that I picked up from teaching is when my students weren't paying attention, I would get really quiet, and I would keep talking, but it would be really quiet.
Yeah, you can lower the tone of your voice.
And then just in terms of this, we use it in scouting all the time, but they do this. That's a scout sign, and you'd be amazed how quickly you can get
Oh yeah.
little younger people and adults too.
I think Nazis had a variation of that as well. But we can't talk about that. But they all work, and it's all based on the same thing. Just get them to shut up, but not with your voice. So ask them to do something, clap, or just shut up. You can talk low, but if you do that from the start, it's kind of strange, because they're like, oh, is this person just willing to talk low in a conference setting? No good. So command their attention. You're totally in charge of that situation. Just act like it. Don't rely on it. And a big part of that, and there's 10 things here to make the biggest difference, but outsource your intro. So I've seen it over and over again at every conference I've ever been to. They walk out and they're like, so a little bit about me, and no offense to anyone who might have done that, but that feels super salesy. A little bit about me, I did this, I did this, I did this, I'm an achiever, I did this, I had a book, I did a talk, I have so many views, and I had no job, and now I have 6 million followers, and it's totally amazing. And you're just like, I don't like you. And it just sets off these triggers in our mind where we're like, I'm being sold to, like I don't like it. So write something on an intro. It's different in a workshop like we're doing and like you were doing when you walk out because there's nobody to introduce you. But when it's on the main stage and there's a bit of consequences there, I didn't do it, I must admit, at this conference. But when the stakes are super high and you're a bit nervous and worried about it, you just write down exactly what you once said about you and give it to somebody. And write it on a card, not a bit of paper, but you know the little cue cards, and hand it to the host on the day. Just say, hey, if you're worried about what to say for me, there you go. Because otherwise they're going to go, I'll just improv something. And you're like, don't improv something, because it's not going to be correct what you say, or the laugh they get might be at my expense. Because they're nervous. So our next guy, he has a bit of an accent. He could be from Australia, he could be from Canada, he could be intoxicated. I don't know. Here we go. And then I walk out and I'm like, that was kind of funny, but now I'm screwed. Because I may be a drunk guy from Canada. And they don't know that, so now my talk has to start by me addressing that and not doing my rehearsed 30 seconds. So I can't tell you how much this will happen to you in life, but it will happen to you a huge amount, where they say exactly what you were planning on saying. So if I was going to walk out and be like, hey, who here thinks they're not funny? By show of hands. That's the exercise I'm going to start with. I can't tell you how many times the guy ahead of me was like, so this thing is about humor. So who here thinks they're not funny? And then I'm like, oh shit, I told you I was going to do that. Don't you do that. So under nerves, they will do strange things. Humans do strange things. So just write your introduction. Make sure your name is only said once and last. That's quite important. So do you ever go to a tech conference or anything and they're like, oh, Roger's here. Roger's a great guy. Roger, really nice guy. I met Roger like years ago first. We came together emotionally over cocktails. And I'm glad Roger's here today because Roger's been a real thought leader and an influencer. And then they go, Roger. And you're like, yeah, I know it's Roger. Nobody really reacts to that. But I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, you ever go to a comedy show? Ladies and gentlemen, your next comedian has just been on tour with Jerry Seinfeld. His album is #1 on iTunes at the moment. He is all over the country. We are really privileged to have him here tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please make it loud for, and you're like, who is it? That's the only question your mind is asking. Even though you know who the speaker is, you have the schedule, you know who the comedian is, you're still like, who might it be? So you're trained to applaud on the mention of their name. So very important. If you give someone your intro to do, make sure your name is only said once and it's the last 2 words. Credentials. How many credentials do you think you're going to give the audience to establish your credibility? 3, if you can, followed by your name, and give that intro to someone. Email it to them, write it on the card, give it to the organizers in advance, and try and have someone sell you so you don't have to sell yourself. But you're digging yourself a hole if you start with your list of achievements. It's weird. It's like someone reading you their LinkedIn bio. I like the LinkedIn bios, but if I just stood here and read it to you, David did this, David did that, are you talking about yourself in the third person? You weirdo. Right, but that would be weird. So you can just come out and be you. So outsource your intro. I just like sheep, so I'm going to stick a few animals in here, but cut the fluff. Very, very, very important. Did you ever hear about the monster that was roaming around New Zealand for the longest time? Shrek even had a nickname. It was like their version of the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah, everyone was phoning in about this monster. Here is the monster. Shrek the sheep, and he went missing for 6 years and he didn't get sheared, and he got so big he couldn't even see out of his own eyes anymore. And he was just walking around New Zealand bumping into things and doing very weird stuff. Look at his little eyes there. You can't see out of those at all. And they finally brought him on television and they sheared him in New Zealand for charity, and that's what he turned out to be. He's only a fraction of the sheep that he used to be. Live on TV. And the reason I tell you this is because that is your talk. And that is what it should be. So if you end up bringing someone an editor or a book or an idea or a content piece, especially these days, if you're writing a bit of content there and you wrote 3,000 words, they're like, that's great, give me the 800-word version. It's the same with a TED Talk. That's nice that you have your hour keynote, but I'm not going to pay attention to your hour keynote. So the maximum human attention span is 9 minutes and 59 seconds. That's from a lecturer here at MIT who gets voted the lecturer of the year every year at MIT, because he knows the brain does not recover that level of attention after that. So I think keynotes are dead. I think they're totally a thing of the past. I would never want to speak. This is a little bit of a different environment, but even this is nearly impossible to keep your attention for an hour and a half. Nearly impossible. But a nice 10-minute short punchy talk, it forces me to put a lot of work into it, and it forces me to turn that into this. So, and it's the same with the stories you're going to tell. I would have assumed, but I did this story, and my mother doing strange things again, but it took me 21 minutes to tell it. It was kind of like a one-man show, like theater piece. And then someone asked me to come and tell it for NPR, and they're like, that's great, but you have 6 minutes. Well, I can't tell that in 6 minutes. And I told it in 6 minutes. I listened back to it, and I was waffling for 2 minutes. It could have been a 4-minute story, and it could be a 1-minute story, and it would still work. So it's just, nobody teaches you how to do this. Most of the time you don't have someone to look over your talk or your slides. Sometimes you have a loved one to do it for you, but they'll probably only do it once, and then they're like, get away from me. Like, look, I changed one little slide, what do you think? And they're like, we need to get divorced. Like, go away. I don't want to see this. Sorry, you had a question? Yeah, jump in at any moment.
If you have an hour-long keynote or a 30-minute session,
Yeah.
are you suggesting that you cut that into 3 10-minute talks for 30
Yeah, well, so here's a couple of ways to manage it. When you get to 10 minutes, be aware that you need something to hook their attention. So if you are forced to do an hour, a new story, a new bit, a little activity, just get them to do anything that will pique their interest levels again. So I'll give you that. I'll tell you how to make everything much better, and we'll get to that in a minute. It's a bit like one of those sales things you get subjected to. Do you want to learn the 10 things? And then there's a half an hour of waffle, but you kind of hang in there because you still want to know what those things are. Or most organizers book conferences in 1-hour slots because it's easier for them to do. Historically, that's been the way it's done. You're going down as a speaker if they put you on stage for an hour most of the time. Don't quote me on any of this. There's extra pressure on me here talking about this with Byron sitting there at the back because he'd be like, you're never coming back again. No, but I always tell them this on speaking. I firmly believe it that they're just doing it for convenience. It's much easier to manage 10 speakers than it is 60. It's much easier to do an hour slot. But it's much easier for you as a speaker to say, you know what, an hour would be fantastic. Let me do 20 minutes and I'll make up the rest in Q&A and I'll make it really interactive. And they're like, that's great, interactive sounds great. But you're basically getting yourself off the hook to do a 1-hour talk. You can do a Q&A, and if no one has any questions for you, just finish early. Nobody ever complains, right? Because everybody else is going to run over on their talks. The schedule's going to run sideways, and retrospectively after the conference, they'll be quite happy that you went short. So nobody ever loses out in that scenario. There's a certain structure to do it that I stole from Andrew and another person. I'll show you how to do that in the end, but there's something you need to know a little bit more on that. For the content side, go through your own content and score it from 1 to 5. So look at what you're going to say, look at your content, look at what you're going to publish, look at what you're going to vocalize, and give it a number between 1 and 5. 5 is people love it, they tweet it, they ask me questions about it, I love it, it always gets a laugh, it's funny. 4 is kind of the same thing. 3 is like, does it really need to be in there? 2, nobody ever asked me about that, nobody comes up to me, no one's ever commented on my blog post about it, no one's ever excited by it. 1, I didn't even know how that ended up in there. And just cut out all the 1s, 2s, and 3s and continuously do that until your talk is just your highest grade stuff. And if that means it's a 10 or a 15-minute talk instead of an hour, that's better. No one's ever going to come up to you and go, oh my God, that talk was amazing, I just wish it was longer. Just you went, not even your family are going to come up to you on that. So just be aware of that. Always continually be refining and not continually expanding. You can call it a workshop any day and expand your thoughts if you want, but when it's a talk, try and go short. So cut the fluff. If anyone's nervous with public speaking or they use loads of filler words or you are worried you go too fast, like Our Lady was earlier, just raise your voice 20%. Fixes everything. You cannot say at an elevated tone the word, it just doesn't work like that. So if you're a little bit nervous about public speaking, and in every great talk in history, there's lots of filler words. In a lot of TED Talks, they're not because they're so rehearsed, but the thing that made public speaking interesting, the Martin Luther Kings and the Winston Churchills, they're all full of filler words. They're just something we do in life, but we've been socially conditioned to feel that they're a really bad thing in the world of public speaking, and it makes us nervous public speakers even more nervous when we go, so, I mean, it doesn't sound great, but if you're worried about it and you want to eliminate it, just raise your voice. So if I speak in an elevated tone like I am right now, it sounds very normal to you within 2 or 3 seconds, and I cannot use a single filler word, and it slows me down considerably. So if you're worried about it, just raise your voice, problem is fixed. That's the easiest one. This one, don't ever, imagine I gave this whole 1.5 hours and I just stood over here like this. For 1.5 hours, it would be horrendous. Who stands behind a podium and talks to you like this? Hopefully not the last speaker, I wasn't here. But who stands behind a podium and talks? Preacher? Anyone else? President, politicians? Lecturers. So everybody who's put you to sleep, bored you, or kind of offended you at some stage in life, this is their speaking position. So on body language, you need to see someone to trust them. So a lot of conferences you'll go to, the only microphone will be stuck to that podium. So you either come out and you raise your voice and you turn up with your own clicker. So you cannot expect every conference you ever go to have slide advancers. I have 2 in my bag right now. I bet you Andrew has about 7 of them. He's more organized than me. Probably have like 2 personalized ones somewhere. How many do you have? 2. 2 is good enough. But you do, because this ruins your life as a speaker. This will impact you the most of any talk going. Assuming the AV equipment doesn't break, not having a slide advancer. So the organizers, I've been told this in the past, we were talking about it yesterday, they're like, just point your hands like this to us and we'll advise them for you. You're like, no, that's a terrible solution. So this allows you to walk around, and if someone's being disruptive, so say you're teaching something or you're doing a workshop like this, and somebody is being distracted or they're being loud, all I have to do is walk near to them and continue what I'm doing, and they'll stop their behavior instantly, right? Just out of fear that I might be talking about you typing notes there, which you're doing, that's fine, I know. But even that, you'll stop just in case. So it allows you to freely walk around people and control the audience. Once you're stationary, you're screwed and they don't trust you. So body language 101, it's the reason a lot of the time all our offices have windows and glass these days and desks that don't have privacy screens anymore. You need to see someone to trust them. So just never ever present from behind a podium. This technique saves everybody's life in the world, and I'll just keep an eye on the time for you. If you're memorizing something, probably the thing that allows you to be freest and the most closest version to yourself and conversational on stage is to know 100% you're not going to go blank. So most people's biggest fear on public speaking is like, what if I'm just standing there and I don't know what to say? So the nice thing for you guys is you've already learned the technique to fix this. So it's called the memory palace. You learned it to learn the word caber in Spanish. You create a story for every key element of your presentation, but you got to take it one step further. You put it in a physical location. So when I'm doing a talk, say like I was yesterday on stage, I have a roadmap drawn out basically that's using my own house or the house I grew up in. And when I'm on stage, all I'm doing is walking around my house. So at no moment am I ever trying to go, what do I say next? Because that in a panic situation, when your heart is element, that's impossible to deal with. All I'm doing in my head is, where am I in my house? So when I'm on stage, this was the story I told about my mother, for example. It's just me walking around my house, bumping into elements. So she's in the kitchen eating her weed cookies, and there's potatoes in the kitchen, and then, I can't remember, there's some other elements. Lululemon pants, we mentioned that yesterday. So there's some element, that's not quite it. When I did one on stage at the Moth in front of like 1,600 people, and I was super nervous. That's what I used. That's what everybody I know uses to get through this problem. It's been used since the dawn of time. We just somehow forgot about it in our ADD age. But there's a great book on it called Moonwalking with Einstein. You might have heard of it. This guy basically was a journalist sent to cover the US memory championships, and he's like, what, they have a competition on remembering things? This is really weird. And he's like, I wonder if I studied it using the 80-20 principle and I come back in a year, could I compete? How good would I be? He came back and he won, and he became the 11th best mind in the whole world, and they just used this. So sequences of numbers, events, nothing is just what is the word is turned into a story. So you go clockwise or anti-clockwise, that's pretty key. Do you maintain the same direction? And you can reuse the same house you grew up in all the time just by picturing it empty and then picturing it full. So you make up a story for every element. So if I have to walk in, I picture someone jumping, immediately I open my front door and my mother is like jumping into an imaginary hole in the ground. It makes no sense to anyone except me, but it allows me to remember it. Yeah. Moonwalking with Einstein, and the author's called Joshua 4, and that's in the link I'll give you at the end as well with more information, and his talk is there as well. It's pretty cool, yeah.
He's got a great
TED Talk as well, yeah. The thing is, he doesn't get into a lot of it, how he actually does it, but you've already learned enough to know today to learn how he does it with a grocery list at one stage, how he memorizes it, but read a little bit more on it, but just even that is enough to apply it immediately and do it. So I had to do a TED Talk a couple of weeks ago. And there's a confidence monitor on stage, and instead of my slides or anything, I just show them a picture of this. So I draw it and I put it there, or I draw it and I hide it back by my computer, or I draw it and I say you have a podium here, I'll put 3 bottles of water or 2 bottles of water in front of it, and I'll put it there. So at any moment I can go and sneakily have a look at it. No notes, because when you're panicked as a nervous speaker, you will read notes. If it's a full sentence, if it's on presentation mode and it's a full sentence, you'll default to reading that sentence and you don't sound natural anymore. So just have the keyword that jogs your memory. That keyword jogs a story, and you're like, oh, I totally remember the story. I always remember a story. So yesterday when I was speaking on the main stage, that talk I prepared at around 2:35 p.m. And then while the guy was talking before me, I was actually editing the slides because I do it in Prezi. So I stuck a few things that he mentioned in the presentation. And then I had 2 confidence monitors, and on one I had my next slide, and 2 I had a picture of a memory palace that I drew. So at any moment I can just have a look at that, and you don't know any of that is happening. So it's super helpful, but if you don't have the big confidence monitors, you can just draw it and put it on the podium. You can put it on the water bottle. You can just have it somewhere on your person. So you're like, you know what, if I panic and it goes horribly wrong, I can just pull out this picture. In meetings, you can just put it on the table. Nobody has a clue what it is. So they don't know you're actively looking at notes. Comedians, you'll see a lot of the time go over and take a drink off a stool, and on that stool is a list of the things they're going to talk about, but you just don't see it's there. So in that moment of just having a drink of water, they're actually looking at what's coming next. No matter how slick they are, I've seen people just come off Conan the week before and go do that in a comedy show. So if you have notes, be sneaky about them. Don't put it on presenter mode. Don't put all the notes on your slides, because you're going to read them in a panic if you get nervous. And use the memory palace. Check it out a little bit more, but this is the thing that will make you most confident as a speaker, because at any moment you can react to something that's going on in the room, and if it goes horribly wrong and sideways, and you can jump back into your content. So if I ask you to picture your favorite restaurant at any moment in your head, and I'm like, what's it look like? How many tables are on the first floor when you walk in? Where's the server located? Where's the bathroom? You can picture that nearly instantly. So imagine you take your house or a building you grew up in, how much easier that is you just feel at home. So just let that be the structure of your talk. Prepare by doing your bullet point list, turn every bullet point into a story, and then put those stories taking place somewhere and have all the elements interact with each other. Sounds madness, but it makes your life very easy in the world of public speaking, because you're never going to go blank. Yeah?
To that point, it's made me think of one of the things that I've noticed about your presentation, and it's something that being in academia I pick up on right away. The less on the screen, the better to distract me.
Yeah.
You talk about the only thing to me worse than you reading your presentation is knowing the audience is spending all their time reading your presentation while you're doing it to us.
Yeah.
I think the worst thing about that is that I'm actually listening to you. So even if you're injecting something really important, I'm focused on this. And I think that's, I've gotten to the point where I'll get a couple minutes of a presentation. If there's too much text up there, I actually...
Well, and that's just pure human nature. So, and it's a good point that he's making. Just don't put more than 20 words ever on any of your slides. And if it can be 4 or 5, even better. Because your slides shouldn't guide it. You should never be like, what's up next? What do I have to say next? Because then you're worried about the presentation mode. But if you use the memory palace to memorize the flow of your talk, you always know which slide is coming next. And that way you can say, this image, this really sums it all up, and bang. Just in case you have no confidence monitor. So you use the same technique to memorize it, but yeah, it's a very good point. Just the less text on there, the better. There's nothing worse than like someone preemptively putting up a list of 20 things and then just starting to read it. Like if you're really going to do it, at least have them shooting in one by one so that I don't have to read it all. This one is a nice handy one. Don't pet hamsters. So it sounds a bit weird, but all nervous public speakers default to the same position. They start doing this like they're petting an imaginary hamster. So you're going to see it. You saw it with your top influencers yesterday when Nadia was talking about it on stage, making fun of them. A lot of people get nervous about it. So if you want to fix that, I can borrow that for a second. Do I have another noisy one? This is noisy enough. Can I borrow that for a second? So just practice with a glass in each hand, because when you're at home doing a little run through or even a very quick one morning of the event, you'll be very conscious every time they come together. So you just get used to talking using your hands, which doesn't feel that natural, but looks incredibly natural. So when you get up there, you're kind of nervous. You're like, what do I do with my hands? Just use them like you would talking to a friend. But hold 2 things in your hand when you're practicing. That's how actors prepare for camera shoots a lot of the time. They hold something. So it just forces them to use their hands. Sorry for stealing that momentarily on you. But you get the idea. Just fixes one big problem very, very quickly, especially if you're doing webinars and stuff to camera, it all feels a bit weird. So you're going to do that, so if you want to stop yourself doing that. And we had this one earlier, acknowledge the obvious. So if something's going horribly wrong, if you're not able to manage the room, if you just spilled some coffee all over your shirt or your fly is open or something weird's happening, you have to mention that. If everybody can see it's happening, then you just talk about it. You cannot ignore it and move on. This is the most powerful example I can ever find of petting the hamster combined with acknowledging the obvious. So it's from Dave Eggers, a very famous writer, really good. Just check it out.
Thank you so much, everyone from Ted and Chris and Amy in particular. I cannot believe I'm here. I have not slept in weeks. Nihill and I were sitting there comparing how little we've slept in anticipation for this. I've never been so nervous, and I do this when I'm nervous, I just realized.
Right, so acknowledge the obvious, nice and fast, petting the hamster. They all think he's a weirdo. He realizes it, acknowledges it, and he takes the pause to let them laugh because he knows it's coming. And so if you're doing something weird, just say, oh, I just realized I do this weird thing. I get really nervous. Look at my hands. They're all over the place. I can't control it. Totally fine. But if they see it, like one of the good questions as well was hiding the ways you're nervous. If you're holding something and you're shaking, I always shake. So if I had a handheld microphone now, you could see it. Did I be nervous, don't you? Especially if I'm on the main stage. So it's nice to have something like this, or avoid it, or leave a microphone in a stand, or request something that allows you not to do it. What happens if you're nervous and your adrenaline's up and you try and hold a piece of paper? It's going to go horribly wrong. So no notes. They assume you're bad if you have notes. So if you walk out with a bit of paper on stage, you're telling everybody, I didn't really prepare for this. So you hide it, but never walk out with it because it just adds to the nerves. Now you're going to read it. Now you're going to shake it. There's just ways you can hide these things and stop them from happening. Yeah?
Let's say it's a 3-act kind of stand-up routine. How do you bring your notes out to set on a stool over the water?
Yeah, and that's it. So I would write it on a bit of paper and wrap a bottle or a drink with it. So I walk out with it just one hand and it's not visible and you just set it down. But they don't really notice. Yeah, you can get away with it. Sometimes I put it on there before the show, even though it's a 3-act, and I'll write it on something dark so you won't see it's a bit of paper. You're really in a hurry to get out of here. Yeah, good work. No worries. And the rest of us are going to be out of here in 12 minutes. Yeah, so don't worry, we'll finish on time. But yeah, a good question. But be sneaky. Some people write it on water bottles. Some people write it on the inside of their hand. You can't see it. Like comedians do all sorts of sneaky stuff just to go, oh, I'm going to forget that if I don't put it on there. So get crafty about it. There's one I want to show you that makes a huge difference as well, is add act out to your talks. So nobody knows what your family members or your boss actually sound like for the most part, and it allows you to shorten words and bring everything to life just by impersonating them a little bit, but not in a way that could be politically incorrect, if you get what I'm saying here. So just be careful with that, who you're impersonating, because it's a bit of a trigger thing in the world. But if it's just your mother or your father or a family member, you're not doing anything to be concocted and racist in any way. You're just saying, oh, my mother went, David, what the hell are you doing there? And that may or may not be what my mother sounds like, but to me, that's kind of what it sounds like. But then I don't have to use the words, and then she said, and then I said, and then he said. So if you listen to NPR's The Moth or Snap Judgment, they're the two biggest storytelling podcasts in America, you'll notice the storytellers all do a particular thing. They always tell the story in the present tense. So if you are doing a story, impersonating the voices allows you to bring it to life by telling it in the present tense. So it's not I walked, and then I went, and then I talked. It's like I'm standing here, and there's a tiger staring straight at me. And I'm like, Jesus, is it going to eat you? What's happening there? And you're immediately into the story. So it makes a big difference. But just watch this. This John Acuff, like 6-time best-selling writer, very good speaker, gets paid about $60,000 to talk. And just watch the small little things. Hopefully you'll see everything coming together that we've been talking about in this one little fast example. But watch out for it.
But we can't get a cat because my wife Jenny is allergic. And so McCrae, our youngest daughter, scrunched up her face and thought, and then said, we can get a cat when Mom is dead.
So it's a brilliant little example to add act out. But you can see straight away that he doesn't really bring the voice hugely. He's not trying that hard. But when he says the words, we can get a cat, and he moves his hand in a way, you're picturing somebody else. He becomes another person. But you'll notice the structure he's using, we should know it well. What are the techniques? We can get a cat when mom is... It still doesn't make sense until he says the word dead. That's the trigger word, that's the funny word, he knows it, that's the reveal, it has to go to the end. We can get a cat, and he slows down the last 3 words and makes them a little bit louder. So now you need to pay attention. We can get a cat when mom is dead. Reaction. And if they don't laugh there, it doesn't matter. He was never trying to visibly be funny in any way, he was just sharing a story about his personal life. So if you watch him as a speaker, it's just personal stories, personal stories, personal stories, they're all funny. I interviewed him when I wrote my book, and it turned out I think he'd studied 100 comedians compared to every one business speaker he watched. So Gary Vaynerchuk, him, Scott Stratton, the guys famous in the world of public speaking, they all cite their influence as comedians. They're watching these guys' structures and they're trying to replicate it. Gary V, he said, sorry, John Acuff, A-C-U-F-F. Again, his name is in the links that I'll give you in 1 second, as well as talks are there also. This one I got from Andrew and another guy who wrote a book, and they're the only 2 places that I've seen it done. Is the best wisdom you'll ever have in the world of speaking. Does never end on Q&A. That's insane. That would be like U2 playing a concert, getting to the very last song, getting the energy right where they want it to be, and then just be like, yeah, screw it. Anyone here play an instrument? Anyone want to sing and bring this one home? You're like, no, that would be really stupid. Why would you do that? So like in conferences and for conference organizers or for you personally, if you're giving a talk, your video is going to end badly if you finish on a Q&A because anything could happen. You could be like, do you have a question there? Any questions? Anything back there? No? Okay. And then I walk off and they're like, oh, actually, I have one. And I'm like, oh, I'm back again. Hello. So there's no moment where they know it's over, so they don't give you a loud applause because they don't know if it's actually finished or not. Do you ever have that when the conference organizer right next to you and like, oh, I think we have a question here. And they're like, no, leave me alone. And they don't want to ask it, and then I just walk off, and it's super flat. So all you have to do is say, I'm going to take a few questions before I make my conclusion. That statement becomes super important because it tells them there's more to come, and if you ask a long-winded question, we as a group of people are going to be here for a long time. So they will literally death stare that person who's like, well, I used to work with a guy called Ron in my office, and I didn't like Ron. He never failed me to make good, and we've been doing a new strategy, and I don't feel great about it, to be honest. And you're like, what the hell are you doing? Where's the question? And the other people will death stare them at that moment because they know, hey, we need to get out of here. He said there's more to come. So that allows me as a speaker to be standing there, and if you don't have any questions, I can just move straight to my conclusion. There's no awkward ending, and then everybody knows it's over. And as a conference organizer, I can just edit out the Q&A, and the talk works perfectly as it is, but I always get a strong ending. So it will end with a round of applause because you're used to applauding at the end. But you have to know it's ending. So if I just kind of walk off at a moment, you don't really know what happened there. So can you never end on Q&A. This one I love. You might have seen me playing around with this in conference, but it's probably the easiest marks you ever get from an audience for doing something in the moment and showing them that you're one of the audience and you were paying attention. Use a callback. A callback is a reference to something that was already said that was funny and happened in the moment that couldn't have been pre-scripted. So these are huge. I did this talk a couple of weeks ago, again, a TED talk. I didn't really want to do one in life, but I finally found an organizer. He's just like, get up there and say whatever you want. You don't have to tell me. And I was like, oh, sweet. I can just go tell a story. So, and as I'm going out on stage, there was like 2,400 people out there when I walked out, but the girl before me had given this talk, and I want to show you how it started. You'll never see what I'm about to show you. It's not online. It's not in my TED talk. It's what's been edited out. So if you're speaking at a conference, you can ask an organizer like Byron, and again, from Andrew's wisdom, and it's in all my contracts and anyone else's now, you must send me any video for editing notes before you publish it. And that way, if I say something mental, it can be taken out. Like there isn't really a risk, so I can be more conversational, be myself. If there's an opportunity to start off by goofing around and doing something funny, you can take that, and then you can just pause and start the actual talk, and that could all be edited out. So this is how my TED Talk actually started. This girl came out and had the weirdest start to a talk ever, and I'll show it to you. She just walked out and said, no context, we're going to start this talk when I feel an earthquake. And then just stood there for a minute, and then everyone was like, what the hell is going on here? And this is what happened, and this is how my actual talk started, but you won't see it online.
So this talk will start whenever there's an earthquake. Okay, yeah. this just mean an earthquake?
I didn't really know how to start this talk today. I'm a bit confused now. You guys are looking way more relaxed about it than I am. Good to see. I was going to just stand here and wait for an earthquake. And but that's been done now, and this talk nearly didn't make it at all happen. I nearly didn't make it to the stage because she said there was an earthquake. I left the building. And that's how I know you're an amazing crowd, because you went, no, we're staying. So you'll never see that on there anywhere. Sorry, just to stop that happening again. But so she had sensors fitted in her body that allowed her to feel an earthquake at any moment ever. She's like a human cyborg. Amazing stuff, but no context. They're like, what the hell's going on here? And it was so memorable, that's the easiest laugh ever. I know that, and I know I can edit this out of the actual talk. So it makes sense in the room. Everybody's reacting at a higher level to stuff I'm going to say, and then I can actually do the serious part of my talk. So if there's an opportunity there for a callback, it usually only works to quote the 3 speakers before you. That's the most effective. So it has to be fresh in the mind, but sometimes I'll do stuff from the day before just to play around and make it more recent. So start further back and bring it back to recent, so that they'll figure out what you're doing as you're talking. They're like, oh, we heard that. Like yesterday I said something about latex gloves and salt and cereal. They were from the morning, and it took a bit of figuring out what I was actually doing. But that can get you a huge elevated response for very little effort, and you never see what's going on after the fact as long as you ask for editing notes on the video. So, hey, can we cut this out? Of course, because they were going to publish that with this included, but nobody would have seen her talk, so my talk would make no sense. I'd look like a lunatic. So it's very important that's in the contract that I get a chance to do that. Super important. So, and last one, review and evaluate. Conference organizers will say they'll get you video, and they're lovely people. And Byron, you have it in your agreement that we might get video sometime in the next 6 months. And a lot of organizers are like that because it takes a long time to go in and edit video. But for me, emotionally, I just went on stage. Did I do good or bad? I don't know. I could feel terrible for the next 5 days and go, oh, that went horrible. And I've had a number of times where I felt like that. I got off stage and I'm like, that didn't go good. I didn't sleep well that night because I was like, oh, that was terrible. I have no way of checking. Like I'm like emailing an organizer, hey, when do we get this video? And in 6 months, I don't actually care about it anymore. So the only time you're going to edit and review that is nearly that day itself. So do what comedians do. If you don't like watching yourself on video, don't video it, but at least audio record it. So yesterday when I was on stage, I had my phone in my back pocket. I pressed audio record, and then on my way home, I listened back to what I said, and I went, oh, that went pretty well or not. Because otherwise, it's just down to my emotional state of mind, and I have no objective way to say, did I do good or did I do bad? So every time you're doing some public speaking, some form of it, audio record it so you can go back and see how it went, and that allows you to make edits on the fly. So you're like, oh, I said that, nobody laughed, okay, cut that. But it's the only way emotionally you can be like, okay, I did good or I did bad. Sound like madness? So yeah, that's the main ones that I think make the biggest difference in the world of delivery. How you start your talk, how you hide the nerves. And there was one little thing you didn't say on the dark topics, that yours was a very good question. Dark topics have more leeway for humor. Don't be nervous around it, use it. They need to release that tension. So a friend of mine did a TED Talk. He is blind and paralyzed, and he walk out on stage. He's bald, blind, and paralyzed. So you look at him, and you're just like, wow, this guy's screwed. Like most people don't have a way to relate to paralysis alone. They definitely don't have a way to relate to being bald and paralysis. So his talk, whatever he's going to say, it doesn't feel like it applies to you. But unless he makes it so. So he rolled out in a wheelchair, and he's from Northern Ireland. He's like, ladies and gentlemen, I'm blind, I'm paralyzed, I'm bald, and I'm from Northern Ireland. I've got problems, but I bet you do too. And now something that is not relatable to anyone is relatable to everybody in one sentence and a violation of that structure. So he didn't use the rule of 3, he went as 4, but the element was still at the end. So I'm bald, I'm blind, I'm from Northern Ireland. Flip. Bald, I'm blind, I'm bald, I'm paralyzed, I'm blind, I'm from Northern Ireland. Sorry, with bald as the second last one. But he's still using that same sequence, he's just making sure the last element is the release of tension. So watch Maysoon Zaid, she's an activist. I think she lives between Boston and New York. Her talk is on cerebral palsy. It's called 99 Problems, but the palsy ain't one. And it's one of the heaviest topics ever, and I think it's the funniest TED Talk of all time on laughs per minute, or the second funniest, and I have it in this link I'm about to give you in a second, so you can all get out of here. happily. But that was the only thing I think I didn't address. Ending strong, I'm about to in a minute, but the best way to end strong is to link the end to the start. Then they know it's over and not finish on Q&A. So wherever you want to go with your talk, work backwards from the end, and that's how you'll end strong and not end on a Q&A. So you'll see that done a lot. I think I might have did it yesterday. I started off, I dropped a bit of my mother's story, and then I came back to it at the end again. Because then when you come back to it, people feel, oh, it's about to be over. And to let them know it's about to be over, you put in a few callbacks just before the last section of your talk. So you reference things that you already said in your talk. So I got into this whole mess, and I didn't tell you at the start because a friend of mine suffered a spinal cord injury, and I had to organize a fundraiser for him, and I was always afraid of public speaking. And so I didn't want to do it. But you know, I would have described it as a crippling fear, and then you're sitting there looking at your friend in a wheelchair, and you're like, now that's crippling. Like the fear of public speaking, it shouldn't be. It just seemed ridiculous. So to try and get over a fear, I started doing stand-up comedy. And I ended up like on a big stage in the Mott telling all these stories about my mother and other weird stuff. And it kind of went full circle. So I like this sign. Roses are red, bacon is red, poems are hard, bacon. So this guy blatantly tried to do everything that we've talked about today, failed miserably, went for the tree elements, he tried to move the keywords to the end, then he just gave up, and then he acknowledged the obvious failure, and it's still funny. That's kind of public speaking in its own. You can goof around, the audience will allow you to goof around, and if it goes badly, just go, well, that didn't go very well, did it? And they'll go, no, it didn't, and they'll all laugh, and you still got to laugh for failure. There's very few things that are that supportive in life when it comes to it. Just remember, I'd love you to remember on this, the audience is always on your side. I showed this video last year at Substage. I don't know if anyone saw it. But if not, it's the world's best video and the world's best example, I think, in public speaking of just how much the audience is on your side and just how much they will wait for you to say something cool, longer than you think. You can be silent for a very long time, but just see what you think. It's also the best example that the end of laughter is followed by the height of listening. It's going to be a little loud. Watch out on the audio.
This is how bad I was at sex the first time. The first time I ever had sex.
Yesterday?
Glad you remember.
Oh, I love that guy. Have you met him doing stand-up? He's from New York. That was a full 29 seconds. Best example I've ever seen. That's the link I promised I'd give you guys. I know some of you if you didn't get a book yesterday, I think they had 15 free signed copies, and they've given out some numbers, so they'll give them to you on the way out. I don't know if you want to take a photo of that or write it down. I'm easy to find and get in touch with. My email is just david@funnybiz.co, although I didn't put it up there. And you don't need to buy that book ever. You probably got it for free already. If you didn't, all the tips from it you can get for free by going to that website. So rather than making you read my waffle for 170 pages, I just stripped out all the tips and you can just get them by themselves. That's enough and a good recap of the session we've just been through today. I'll put that back up in a sec, but I didn't want to leave you hanging. So the Mott story I was telling you about, that's 1,400 people all staring at me on stage, and I'm about to lay an egg. I'm still nervous. It's still all the things we've talked about, but I've got good at hiding them, like I told you how to hide them. The only thing I probably didn't say is most of the time I'm wearing a black shirt or dark clothes. You might have noticed in some of the videos because they can't see me sweating, and you can't see all the sweat patches. But that's another thing that you're going to sweat out your clothes a good 30% of the time when you're public speaking, especially when you're nervous. They have some lights on you, like some spotlights that you cannot control. Expect that that's going to happen and wear something that hides it because that's going to add to your nerves. Like if you're walking out with 2 big sweat patches already, but if you can't get away with that, what would you do? Imagine you walked out and you're visibly sweated out. What would you do? Mention it, exactly. So you're like, I've really got out of the way to prove that I'm nervous about this talk today by just soaking myself in sweat. So again, you'll be able to notice that at parts of this talk, and then you can get on with it. It's fine. But otherwise, they're thinking it. So that's me on stage. And I just told a story, and it was pretty funny. My whole theory was comedians are the world's true masters of public speaking. So I'm like, there was 3 comedians in this storytelling competition. It's the biggest final anywhere in the world organized by the Mott, 1,400 people. And I went. And it was, with 1 person left to go, the comedians were winning 1, 2, and 3. Because my whole theory is they're the world's true masters of public speaking, they should win. There's only 1 lady left, and I was winning. And then she went and she beat me by like point something something. Her story was amazing. And like my friend Arash, who'd suffered the spinal cord injury, they were all there in the audience. They're like, you're going to win. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And I'd self-published a version of my book, and now I just sold it to a publisher, and they had asked me to rewrite the story within it and the ending of it. So I was looking for a good ending. So I was like, oh, if I win this competition, that'd be a good ending, and I didn't. And then I got talking to the lady, and I was like, that was amazing. How'd you do so good? And she's like, oh, I was like, you've no background in comedy, but that was hilarious. And she said, oh, I've been reading a lot about comedy. I found all these things were very helpful. And I was like, oh, well, tell me. I'm about to publish a book on it. And she's like, oh, this one was great. And she pulled up these notes, and it was 7 Comedy Habits to Be a Funnier Speaker by David Nihill. I was like, you beat me with my own book. I couldn't believe it. And I got a photo with her and all this stuff. And I was like, well, that's the end of all this now. And then funny enough, a guy had seen me that night and he said, I like the story you told. Would you come and tell it as a TED Talk? And I never really wanted to do a TED Talk, but I thought that would be a cool ending to the whole thing. And this was a few years back. But I said, listen, I have a friend who had a spinal cord injury. He's the reason I got into all this public speaking carry on in the first place. He'd be way better than anything I'd ever said. Maybe you consider him. He just did his first talk. He had a couple of comedians help him with the techniques within it. I think you'll like it. And I sent it to him. And he booked him. That was me and my buddy Arash on stage. He got a 51-second standing ovation as he told them how doctors told him he'd never ever stand on his own 2 feet again. But he trained for every single day for a year because he didn't want to propose to his beautiful girlfriend eye to eye from sitting in a wheelchair. Or he didn't want to propose to her from sitting in a wheelchair. He wanted to do it eye to eye. So he did his talk, and then at the end of the talk, he stands up out of the wheelchair. She comes out on stage. Of course, she said, yeah, whole place loses their mind. And even the hairs on my neck to stand up telling you guys about it, because it's quite a heavy moment. But it was laced, although it was a serious topic to your question, it was laced with techniques for the world of comedy to tell it more effectively. So if you take nothing away from all this waffle, I'd just like you to always start with your own story. Realize they actually want to hear about you more than they want to hear about your graph or your pie chart. And just find the key point of all those stories. And then when you're telling it, use comedic techniques because they always make it more effective. Because at the end of the day, it's your story. You know it better than anybody else. And you never know what will happen when you tell it. So thank you very much for hanging in there with me today. Greatly appreciate it.